Hi, this is going to be a basic tutorial on using Inochi Creator. My intention is to get you started using the program and maybe help you transfer over some knowledge and skills that you might have from Live 2D and transfer them over to using this program. I'm using a avatar that is powered by Inochi2D. But I didn't create it myself from scratch. I generated it using a program called Mannequin, which was developed by AR14, and the tracking that it's using was also a program developed by AR14 called Puppet String, and I think it looks pretty good. It can do the mouth twist. The version of Inochi Creator that I'm using right now is the latest stable release, which is 0.8.3 for Windows. There is a Mac version in development and a Linux version, but to my knowledge, the Mac version is not very stable right now, not very usable. This program is still technically pre-release. So it's a little janky. Inochi2D has a bit of a different design philosophy compared to Live 2D. The main developer of Inochi2D, Luna, has a bit of a background working in game engines, and as a result, the program has taken some design cues from like 3D programs. Like the node setup here might remind you a bit of Godot if you've used that. Personally, because I have a bit of a background in Blender, it reminds me a lot of the Outliner tab. If you're watching this several months in the future, then you might want to go check to see if there's been a major release since, like 0.9 or 1.0. And my hope is that after a major release like that, then we'll have some new tutorials that are available in the future that can better reflect features that have been added. For example, I believe that planned for the release of 0.9 is compatibility with game engines. So if you've ever played a visual novel that has Live 2D puppets, that is sort of a functionality that Inochi2D hopes to replicate one day. So what I've got here is a freshly imported PSD file with just a really basic pair of eyes. I know they're probably a lot simpler than anything that anyone actually wants on a model, but you know, for the sake of a basic tutorial, I've got a basic pair of eyes, not too many parts to have to worry about. First thing I can do is just delete this background. So for every layer of the PSD that I just imported, we've got what's called a part for the image that is displaying. And at the root of this node structure that we have right now, we have the puppet node. And you can, in the inspector of the puppet node, change some general info, such as like this licensing information, physics globals, this rendering setting, point filtering. This comes in handy when you're making pixel art models. There is a user named Gottenberg who's already made a pretty cool tutorial about how to make pixel art models, and that's available on Steam. And that tutorial doesn't actually cover mesh deformation, but instead it covers frame-by-frame animation for facial expressions, which is really cool. So for every node, we've got a little gizmo, you can see it right here, that represents where the origin point of the node is, and this is a point around which we can rotate things. Unfortunately, it's not really possible right now to move where the origin point is, but real quick I can show you a workaround for that. I'm gonna mouse over the puppet node so that I can add a node which is the child of it, unnamed node. If you double click, it doesn't rename, instead it zooms in like that. I'm gonna rename this to use the carets to denote what side it is so that I don't have to remember what is right and what is left, because it's often the naming conventions on models is that you go with what the model's right and left is as opposed to what your right and left is, and it gets kind of confusing. So and I can move it around before it has any children, and that prevents me from moving anything with it. And I am going to select all of the parts. It's control select instead of shift select. And I can drag them into here. And that's how this comes in handy for like arms and stuff. Now I can rotate everything around that point. Also, these translation coordinates right here are calculated relative to the parent. So you can kind of imagine, it doesn't really say, but the puppet node is located at 0, 0, 0. And all of these coordinates right here are calculated relative to that. And of course, empty nodes, they don't do much except they have the origin point, and you can also kind of use them like a folder where you can toggle visibility for the entire thing. Now I'm just gonna repeat the process of adding an I node for the other eye. And I'm gonna hide that for now. Now, in order to set up the clipping on the iris, what I do is I select that node, and then I can scroll all the way down. Hopefully, sorry if my overlay for the input is in the way, but now I can click and drag the sclera into the mask source, and repeat that for the iris lines. And I'm going to do that for also the shading. The reason that I set up the shading the way that I did on the eye is because I wanted to demonstrate another type of node that you can add called the composite. I'm not going to demonstrate and explain every single type of node because I don't understand all of them equally well. If you want to know more about physics, then the channel Horns for Eyes here on YouTube has covered a bit more about physics. So I'm adding this composite node as a child to the eye node. And I know that I said earlier that you can't really move the first of all, let me parent these shading to here. I know that I said that you can't really move the origin point, but what you can do is actually right click, recalculate origin, and now the origin is located at the center of all the parts that are the children. So these two shading parts, when I set them up in my PSD, I made the opacity a bit lower, but now I'm just gonna increase it. And I can lower the opacity on the composite because it basically treats every child that it has as a single node for the purposes of shading and stuff. But also, I forgot to mention that all the parts that I imported, they automatically had a sorting order generated so that you know, they show up in the order that they did in the PSD, and you don't have to worry about changing the parentage, changing what order that they draw in. But when I created the composite node, it automatically had a sorting value of 0, so I'm just gonna copy paste one of the sorting order numbers that its child had, and now it doesn't. Dang it. It doesn't overlap and cover the eyelash. You can also just parent parts to other parts. So for example, if I take the iris color and parent it to the iris lines, now they move together, and I'm not sure how to make the pupil shading move with it because it has to be parented to the composite node, but now I have one less thing to move when I go and make the parameter to make the iris and the pupil move. Speaking of which, time to add a parameter. Now, in Live 2D, the way that parameters work is that they always have one dimension, and if you want to do things like making the eyes move in 2 dimensions, then you have to create 2 parameters and link them. But there's no linking in Inochi2D. What you do is you get all these options when you're adding a parameter, and you know what? I think I have to move my avatar out of the way. Technical difficulties, please stand by. There we go. Now you can see what the dialogue looks like. We're gonna add the 2D parameter. I'm gonna rename it by going in Edit Properties, and I'm gonna call this caret eye gaze, and the constraints should be -1 to 1. And now it looks like this. And if I want to reset this value to the breakpoint, I can shift click. So I'm not gonna bother doing any meshing on the iris, and instead I'm just gonna rig the eye gaze parameter using just the translation values. So if I hit arm, now instead of editing base stuff for the model, I am editing the parameter values. And if I set it to that breakpoint, and then I move using the transform, I'm gonna do about 88 or 88. You can type these in, and you got to remember to put the dash in there. And I can also select the pupil shading and just punch in the same value. And I'm going to do 88 in all directions. And now that I've done those 4 directions, the corners have been calculated automatically for me already. And when I'm arming the parameter, I can only view each individual breakpoint, but if I want to disarm the parameter, then I can preview how it looks like with all the in-between values. By the way, if you're like me and you want to preview what everything looks like without the gizmos in the way, without toggling what gizmos are visible at all using that, if you hide and then unhide, that deselects everything. All right, now I'm gonna try to do some meshing, which you can enter the mesh editing workspace by clicking the edit mesh button when you have a part selected. I'm not the most experienced at doing this kind of thing. I will say that like a couple of people have already made VODs of them working in Inochi2D on meshing and stuff. So if you're interested in seeing what this process looks like when someone more experienced with it is doing it, if you want more insight on this process, you might want to check those out. There is a auto meshing feature which you can adjust and bake here. I'm not going to use that because I think it needs some work already. What I will do is press the triangulate vertices option. You can't really bake or customize it now, but you can turn it on, and it makes the lines turn yellow, and it can't really be turned off right now. So If you want to turn it off, then you're going to have to apply it and then come back. So if I want to create more vertices, I can double click, or I can control click. And control clicking on a vertex that's already here will delete it. This problem with the vertices being joined in sort of a circular shape, even to encompass areas that I don't need meshed, that's sort of a bug that's being worked on. It also affects how the auto meshing works, and the way that I tend to solve this is just by adding a vertex that all of these, all that useless geometry can connect to. Alright, now I can apply this and go back in here and delete this guy. Okay, now I'm going to add the blinking parameter, and some people would want to add the 1D parameter 0 to 1, so that you're either blinking or not. You can also, I'm going to do -1 to 1, so that these positive values are going to represent like the eye being really wide. And I'm also going to add a breakpoint by, well, first I'm going to change the name. Add a breakpoint, edit axes points. Seven, 5. Now that I have two parameters and they're both related to the eyes, I might want to group these together, and I can do that by clicking and dragging, and that gives me a new parameter group. Right click it. You can also assign it a color, but I won't bother with that. Eyes group. If I arm the blink parameter, now I can try to explain a little bit about how to use the path deform tool. In the define paths phase, you have to double click, I think. I don't think control works here. And add paths, sort of to define the whole line of this eyelash, go from one edge of the mesh to the other. Hitting the transform path button is what allows you to move them and carry all the mesh with it. It turns a different shade of green. It's not currently very possible to go back and edit the base points, but you can sort of preview them. And if at any point you get so unhappy with your results that you want to just reset the whole thing, you can edit the bindings. If I were to remove this mesh from the binding completely, that would delete all of the keyforms that I've set for that part in the entire parameter. But if I click unset, then I can reset what the part looks like for the selected breakpoint. And then I can go back, well. Also, very important thing to note about the path deformation tool. In Live2D, you can differentiate between temporary path deform tools and permanent ones, but Inochi2D, for performance reasons, only has temporary path tools. So if you go into the vertex tool, suddenly the path deform is gone, same as if you unarm the parameter or if you select a different part. Alright, so now if you'll forgive me for not recording the entire process of rigging the eye blink on camera, mean, it doesn't look that good anyway, but whatever. It looks like this now. Next step, very important, we're going to want to try and mirror all of our work onto the other side. Now, when I first wanted to try and rig a pair of symmetrical eyes in Inochi2D, my plan was to import one side of the parts and then mirror them over, but it's not really currently possible to duplicate parts. So in the PSD phase, you're going to want to remember to make sure that you've got both sides fully separated out, and also all the previous steps about layer management I've replicated onto the other eye, but we can duplicate the meshes so that you don't have to redo that entire process. So what I'm going to do is select one side of upper lashes. It's a different model. I know the mesh looks different, but select the one that we want to copy to, and pretty similar to how you do the clipping, you can click and drag this part, and it says copy mesh now, and you drag it onto there. And then you just hit the flip horizontally button to make it match. So once you've copied over all your meshes from one side to the other, in order to copy over the parameters, what we're going to do is configure flip pairings, which will open up this menu that displays all of the nodes. And you can drag a node onto here and drag its corresponding partner right here, and basically just repeat the process for every I guess it's only necessary for the parts that are being used in parameters that you want to copy over, but that's pretty much all the parts that we're using right now. So I'm gonna copy over everything. For the record, I have no idea what this pair button does. I think we can just click save, and that'll work. And now, I'm gonna have to create a new parameter with the same settings as the old ones in terms of what breakpoints it has. It has to have the same breakpoint or else it won't transfer over correctly. And now, we can just copy and paste with horizontal flip. Except for the fact that I just crashed the program. Let's see what happens when we restore this file from a backup, because it does in fact autosave. And we don't have the parameters that I just created. Give me a second. Okay, let's try that again. We're gonna copy the gaze. We're gonna paste the gaze with horizontal flip. And it does work, except it's kind of backwards. And the way that we're gonna fix that is by flipping the X. And now it works the same as this one does. Last but not least, let's copy eye blink, paste in horizontal flip, and now they both blink. So that's about all that I have for you today. If you'd like to support me on Patreon, don't, because I don't have one, but you should probably give money to the main developer of Inochi2D instead, Luna. Like, especially since you made it this far in the video, clearly you can see that this program is promising. And you can make a one-time donation if you buy this program on Itch. And Session, which is the counterpart to Inochi Creator for tracking, is on Itch. Puppet String is on Itch. Mannequin is on Itch. You can get them all on Itch, and then they automatically update. So yeah, thank you for watching. I'll see you whenever. Okay, bye.